Hi, welcome to West Valley College Fashion Design Department's Basic Apparel Construction class. My name is Karen Kurtz and I'm the instructor for this class. We're going to begin our lesson today talking about the sewing tools that we will be using during our sewing productions here. And we're going to begin that discussion by talking about scissors and shears. This is a pair of scissors. You'll notice that the bows where you hold your fingers are evenly balanced. Shears, on the other hand, have bows that are bent so that when you're cutting out fabric, you can rest the handle of the shears on your cutting surface. It makes cutting fabric much easier. Scissors are meant to be used in the air while you're holding your fabric or other work up. Scissors come in various sizes, and the difference is not related to the length of the blade. What is important is that your shears or your scissors are sharp and that they have a good point, because you'll be using that point when you're cutting. You want them comfortable in your hand, so you're going to have to try a couple of different pairs and find out what's comfortable, because you're going to be using them a lot. Most of the cutting that we're going to be doing is going to be on a straight edge, but there is an occasion for wanting to use what are called pinking shears. These shears have the bent handle, like you're used to seeing, but they also have a blade that cuts a zigzag. And the purpose of that is to lessen the amount of fraying that fabric is going to be doing. Another tool that can be used for cutting is a rotary cutter. It has a round blade that is sharp like a razor blade, so you need to be very careful with it. This has a safety feature which blocks the blade when you're not using the rotary cutter. You cannot use a rotary cutter on a tabletop. You need to have a special surface to do that. The blades themselves are expensive, and so you need to be careful that you protect them, and the special cutting surface allows that to happen. When we're laying out patterns, we can lay the pattern down on the fabric and cut around it using two different methods. If we're using a rotary cutter, we can use weights to hold the pattern paper on the fabric. But these weights, which are industrial-sized washers, will not work if we're using shears to cut with. If we're using shears to cut fabric, we'll want to be pinning the fabric to the pattern paper, and the pins will hold that. When we're pinning, we want to place our pins every 4 to 6 inches. Pins are very important, and so you'll want to choose them with care. I've got a variety of pins here. We have fairly short all the way to very long pins. The pin shaft has a different diameter on each of these, and the points are different as well. When you're choosing your pins, you want to keep in mind the type of fabric that you're going to be using. How easily the pin is going to pierce that fabric, and how strong the pin is for holding the fabric. You want to consider how easy the pin is to pick up in your fingers, and so you're going to probably want something with a well-defined head. Picking up a pin like this one off of your fabric or a table or the floor, as the case may be, can be difficult because the head is so tiny. I find that a larger head pin like this is much easier to use, it's easier to see, and it's easier to pick up. However, you'll notice some distortion on a couple of these. Up here, right in this area, and on this black one here. because these are plastic heads, they got close to the iron and they melted. So if you're choosing a large ball head pin like this, you're going to want one that's made out of glass that will withstand the temperature of an iron, because you're going to be using the pins around the iron. Now this too is a pin, although at over 2 inches long, and with this thickness you could probably use it to hang sheetrock. Not a good thing to use when you're talking about a fine silk. This flower pin has a very flat head and it's easy to see, but it's a very soft pin and it bends easily. Along with pins, there are a variety of needles, and needles come in various lengths, and the shafts have various diameters, and the points are different, as well as the size of the eye. This pin has been well used and it has developed a slight curve. This is normal, and in fact it is something that you might enjoy having on some occasions. So just because a pin gets a slight bend or a curve like that isn't reason to throw it away. This needle here next to it has a double eye, commonly called a self-threading needle. Because when you thread it, you can just notch the thread down into it. There we go. Just pull the thread down into the notch rather than trying to shoot the thread through the tiny lower eye. This needle has a very large eye. It's used for yarn and very coarse threads. As you can see, the shaft of it is very stout, but it has a sharp point. Good for punching through very stiff fabrics like denim or putting together a sweater. Curved needles are often used for sewing boxy things like cushions and one thing and another like that. This very long, very slender needle is a beading needle, and its tiny diameter is so that the needle will go through the center of a bead. This long needle here on the bottom is called a doll needle. It's a great tool to have in your toolkit, using it at your sewing machine as kind of a third hand sometime when you need to use it where you can't get your fingers. Since needle eyes are very tiny, there's a device called a needle threader, which is a very fine diamond-shaped wire that you can put through the eye of the needle, thread the needle through the large diamond, and then pull it back out of the needle, and your needle's threaded. So if your eyes are tired or you need new glasses, needle threaders can help you an awful lot. If you're going to be marking material once it's cut, you can use several different devices. This is called a chalk wheel, and it's filled with chalk, and it makes a very fine line. It comes in a variety of colors, so you can see the marking on a variety of fabrics that you may be using. You need to exercise caution when you're choosing your marking devices like chalks, because oftentimes they will not completely brush out or disappear, and that's a consideration that you need to keep in mind when you're using tools of this device. You can use a device like this, which is called a point turner, but they also have very sharp edges here, which you can use to mark creases in fabric just by putting a little bit of pressure. This mark will disappear with washing and ironing and wearing where sometimes these chalk marks remain forever. There are water-soluble and air-erasable pens that you can use. Those do have a tendency to come back after time on some fabrics, so you need to be extremely careful when you're using something like that, that you are merely marking in the seam allowance so that it is not going to show through on the outside of the garment. Along with marking goes measuring. This device is called a seam gauge, and it's 6 inches long, and it is divided into different measuring increments. This one goes down to 1/8 of an inch. It also has metric markings. A slider is a handy tool for holding pre-measured increments. So you can set this at a particular measurement and keep repeating it without having to spend a lot of time focusing on the actual numbers. A measuring tape is something that is extremely important. They come in 60-inch and 120-inch lengths. When you're shopping for one, it's a good thing if you can find one that is marked from opposite ends, so that it's easy to pick up and use no matter which end of the tape that you pick up. They come in a variety of colors. Fiberglass is good, but you want to be careful that you've got something that's not going to stretch. Also used for marking is an awl. It pierces holes in fabric, leather, and your fingers if you're not careful. It's a very sharp point, and we use this for marking drill marks on the inside of our pattern pieces. When we have to make a mark at like the end of a dart point, we use the awl to do that, and it pierces the fabric and it separates the fibers and it leaves a hole, but it doesn't actually break the threads when it's properly used. It comes with a safety cover so that you don't stab yourself when you're trying to fish it out of your sewing kit. A seam ripper is going to become your best friend. It has a sharp point so that you can put the seam ripper underneath the thread. In the curved U part of this is a sharp blade for cutting the thread, and this little red ball is hopefully to protect from cutting your fabric. They come in different sizes from 2 inches to 4 inches. You want something that's going to be easy for you to pick up and is comfortable in your hand because you're going to be using it. Other tools that are handy to have in your sewing box are thimbles. Thimbles are to be worn over your middle finger and used to push the needle through fabric. You want a thimble that is comfortable and fits snugly but not too tightly on the end of your finger. When you're choosing your thimbles, you need to look at them carefully and make sure that the dimples in the thimble are deep enough so that it will hold a needle when you're pushing, so that the needle doesn't skid off. This one is a little bit smooth. The dimples on this one, as you can see, both on the tip and on the side, are much deeper than the previous thimble. You can also get an adjustable thimble. To get it to fit your finger, you drop it in boiling water for 30 seconds, take it out, and while it's still soft and malleable, put it over the end of your finger, and it will expand to fit around your finger. This is a good thimble because the dimples are quite deep. This is called a loop turner, and a loop turner is used to pull elastic or cording through tight places. It has a latch hook at the tip and a hook, so you would grab your fabric or your cord around the hook, and as you pull through, the latch closes and you can pull out a long area. A similar tool, but much smaller, is called a nit picker. This is sold primarily to pull fabric or threads when you've got a snag, like on a sweater. You don't want to cut it off. You want to pull the snag through to the wrong side. So that's what the nit picker is for. But I find it to be a very handy tool when I'm working on one of the overlock machines, and I'll demonstrate its use for that purpose later on. This is a bodkin. It's a clamp. You use it to grasp elastic and pull it through a casing that you've constructed on a garment. You can use the loop turner for the same purpose, but sometimes this little bodkin is a much handier tool. Can't forget our pin cushion. This particular pin cushion is the one that we're probably most familiar with. It looks like a tomato. And who grows tomatoes with strawberries on the side? Nobody but a pin cushion maker. The strawberry has a very specific purpose. It's filled with emery, which is like sandpaper, but it's the sand without the paper. And this is used to sharpen pins and needles that may have gotten a bit dull. You just pierce the strawberry several times to smooth off any sharp burrs on the points of your pins or needles. They can be sold separately, and this one has a handy loop so that if you wanted to wear it over your finger, you could use it as a pin cushion that would be very, very portable, while at the same time sharpening your pins as you're working on garments. I've marked the bottom of this pin cushion with different numbers which indicate to me the type of needles and the sizes, so that I know that in this section these needles here are for a size 10, which is a fairly fine needle. Okay, moving to taking care of our sewing machine. Machines have various screwdrivers. These are slot screwdrivers. They have a straight blade on them. And we use these for both the sewing machine and the overedge machine. This particular screwdriver is very different. Actually, it's called an Allen driver, and it fits a particular type of screw, which has an octagonal shaped recessed head. So the Allen driver goes into the screw, and you only find this on the overlock machines. When we are learning about the overlock machine, I'll demonstrate where this is used. The slot screwdrivers are used on both machines. To keep the machines clean, you'll use a brush to brush the lint out of all of the funny little places on the machine that the lint can collect, down in the bobbin case on the lock stitch machines, and down in the area of the loopers and the blades on the overedge machines. These tweezers are a very handy tool to use at both sewing machines. They can be used to hold the thread to thread the needles. Use them mostly, however, when you're trying to thread the overedge machine. So you'll always want to have these little guys handy because they go places where your fingers can't. Our needle threader can be used as well to thread the needles on the lock stitch machines. Needles for the sewing machine are particular to the sewing machine that you're going to be using. That is, sewing machine needles are not interchangeable between machines. If you look at these two packages, you'll see that they have some different markings. This package is DC 27. That needle system, that is DCX27, is particular to the overlock machines that we use in the classroom. This system, DBX257, is typical for the machines that we use to sew straight seams, which are the lock stitch machines. The 12/80 pertains to the size. The size 12 is the US method of sizing needles. The 80 is the European method. The serger needles here are the same size. That is, they have the same size groove and the same size eye, but as you can see, the two needles are different in lengths and in diameters. If we try to use this short needle in the lock stitch machine, it would not be long enough to reach down and grab the bobbin. The longer needle that we would be using in the lock stitch machine would be too long to use in the overlock machine, and you would get hung up on the loopers and the loops wouldn't form. We'd probably break the needle and perhaps damage the machine. So when you're in the classroom and trying to replace a sewing machine needle, be sure that you're picking the correct needle for the machine that you're going to be working at. Okay, that's it for bits and parts. Our next lesson is going to be talking about threading the lock stitch machine and learning about the parts of it.